I'm Kip, and I'm an alcoholic. That's very nice. So I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink all day long. I didn't hurt nobody today. I didn't hurt myself. I worked all week, paid my way. Every single night coming home, all my neighbors waved at me with all 5 fingers. I might not impress y'all, but I didn't know people could live like that, you know? Last time I was in Tucson, I left there like a bolt of lightning, you know? It was in the mid-'60s sometime, and we drew a crowd. There was a lot of gunfire, and we figured it was time to leave. Yeah. I'm not copping to nothing. My sobriety date is May 12th, 1984. My Holland group is a group called Robbers Roost. And we're about 150 ex-convicts. We've got over 500 years in prison amongst us, and we're shooting for that much sobriety. We're getting there. It's a real honor to be here. This is a very historic event. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here. This is real special. I'm always suspicious when they invite me to Arizona, though. I think it might be a sting, you know, like they just come on down, yeah. My father is Irish and Sioux from South Dakota, and my mother is Irish and Choctaw from Oklahoma. And we lived in a neighborhood that was all first-generation Hispanic, and all the neighbors had dark brown hair and dark brown eyes and dark skin, and my cousins all lived with me, and they all had dark brown hair and dark brown eyes. And me and my brother Bill, we were born with white hair and blue eyes. And we went outside, and the Mexicans wanted to beat our ass. We went in the house, and the Indians wanted to beat our ass, you know? And I don't make you an alcoholic, but sure does make you mean. My daddy was an alcoholic, and he drank. He was a war veteran, and he was heavily damaged in World War II and Korea War, mentally and psychologically. He never got the help he needed. The way it was around my house, you know, you'd be waiting around in the middle. We had wooden floors. We had a little 2-bedroom house and 4 kids with crazy woman and this crazy man, and we'd be waiting, and it'd be getting later and later. My mom was a marcher. She marched, you know, and those hard wooden floors, she wore these hard shoes, and the louder it got, the later it got, but then you just knew, man, it was going to be exciting. And pretty soon you look out you hear this truck coming up the road, bouncing off the curbs, and you look out the window, you'd see all the neighbors grabbing chairs and trying to get a good seat, you know, and my dad would pull in the driveway, and my mother would fly out that front door with a butcher knife. She'd go for the passenger door. He'll bait out the passenger side, you know, and the neighbors would cheer. And that was just Monday night. Holidays were really special. But none of that made me an alcoholic. I'll tell you, my father taught me exactly what alcohol would do to a human being, what it do to a man, a family, a career. I had no illusions about alcohol. I was never going to be one. And I can't blame him for it. You know, I've always blamed San Diego Unified School District. But in the early 60s, they invited all of us young kids to come into this big hall, and they showed us this movie, talked about this stuff we don't talk about in A&A, you know, and my best friend, a guy named Balto, and they showed us this movie, and these guys came up and talked, and they turned the lights back on. And I hit Balto on the ribs. I said, "Can you get some of that?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well," he said, "Meet me after school tomorrow." So the next day I said, "Did you get it?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "What do we do?" He said, "We got to go boost some wine." I said, "How come?" He said, "I don't know. But my dad always drinks wine when he smokes this stuff. We didn't want to make no mistakes." So he went down this canyon and he fired up this cigarette, and he took a hit off of it, and I took a hit off, made me cough. And I'm looking at this stuff. I ripped off a short dog of sweet red pork, and he got a short dog of muscatel out of this little market. We went down this canyon, and I opened that stuff up, and I took a pull on it, and it jumped right out of my belly, and it landed on my shoes, you know? But I ain't no quitter, you know? I took another pull on her, and it started kind of does that bouncing thing, on your stomach, and you pinch your nose and hold it down, and it gives down. And after a little bit, I take another sip and it's starting to go down smooth. And pretty soon it was all gone. I looked over at Balto and he squatted down, sucking on the cigarette, and he said, "Do you what?" And I said, "No." I said, "You going to drink that?" And he said, "No, that stuff is vile." And I said, "Can I have it?" He said, "Knock yourself out, And I drank that too. He's right, it was vile. Never acquired a taste for a muscatel. But something magic happened to me. And I don't know what alcohol did for you people. I have no idea. I only know what alcohol did to me and what it did for me. Because that was my very first spiritual awakening. Something happened to me that was so magic. Only another alcoholic understands. I've been raised in a neighborhood, lots and lots of violence all the time. There was nothing but violence in my neighborhood. And I grew up terrified, absolutely terrified. I've been afraid for so long that it was just part of who I was. And I wasn't even aware of it, And when I drank that wine and I leaned back and I looked up at the sky, all I understood was that, I wasn't afraid of nothing in the world anymore. And a peace and a calmness came over me that I'd never known before in my life. And my skin fit for the very first time. And I knew I had a right to be here, And I knew all about these first 3 steps a long time before I knew about you folks, When I was 12 years old, I knew I was powerless over this world, and I knew my life was unmanageable. And I drank this magic stuff. And I came to believe that there was a power greater than anything in this world, and I immediately turned my will and life over to it, and I never looked back. I got kicked out of school the next year for hitting a teacher for the second time. It was a misunderstanding. And I have a lot of misunderstandings in my life. And, I got home and my mom, the school had ratted my mom out. And my mom, I take care of my mother today. She has advanced Alzheimer's, and I've taken care of her for the last 20 years. But my mom was the meanest woman you've ever met in your life. I saw her stab my dad 3 different times. One time a neighbor was yelling at me, and she came up behind him and knocked him cold with a shovel right in the driveway. Got to respect a woman like that. My mom, she's standing at the front door, and she's got this bag of green vegetable matter in her hand. And she goes, "Got your ass kicked out of school, huh?" I said, "Yep." She goes, "What's this?" I said, "Probably just what you think it is." But she goes, "That's it. You're out." I've been waiting for my mother to tell me that since I was 5 years old. She said, "Get out of my house," and I left. I just turned 13, and I didn't know what to do or where to go. I'd never been anywhere. And I went over to a friend of mine's house, and he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, check this out." And he got this newspaper. He said, "Look, all these young people, they're going up to San Francisco. And all they do up there is get high and listen to music and make love." I love music. When I was 13 years old, music was on my mind 24/7. In fact, it was on my mind till after I turned 60. And I got up there and they were right. I didn't fit in there either, man. I'm a fighter. I've been fighting all my life. These people were all pacifists. And, somebody say something to me, I'd knock them out. But I found out what my true calling was. I found out what my job in this planet was. All these people wanted the same product. And it all comes from Mexico. And all my friends come from Mexico. And I called up Walter and I said, Walter, you can't believe what these people pay for this. And he said, come on down, man. We went down to Mexico, talked to his family, started a little enterprise for a family. And I worked for that family until I was into my 30s. And, when I was 16 years old, I was arrested in Mexico. I went to prison. I was sentenced to 25 years in La Mesa Federal Penitentiary. And I got there and I had long blonde hair. And I couldn't even grow whiskers yet. Sounds kind of scary, huh? But actually, the family I worked for, they ran that prison and they were waiting for me when I got there. And I just went in there and I got my PhD in criminology. And I learned what willing to go to any lengths means. And I learned how to commit crimes without going to jail. And I love Mexico. It's a very civilized country. It works in the principle of mordida. And that just means the little bite. And that means, that if you got enough money, if you know the right people, you can do anything you want, as long as you get the money to the right person. And I don't care if you killed someone on live television, you're going to walk out of there. And we got the right money to the guy, and I walked out. I was 18 years old. I got back across the border. I hooked up with this gal. She got pregnant real quick. And she just told me she was pregnant. And the next morning, I woke up and cops I had guns sticking in my face, and they charged me with 27 felonies. And I went to San Diego, and I never got to see that girl again. They didn't press any charges against her, but they took me and two other guys. And they had us, you name it, they had us for it. And I fought that case for 2 years in San Diego County Jail. And I finally beat it. I finally beat all charges, and I didn't have the other guys. They each got 11 years. But I wouldn't cop to nothing. They gave it up. I wasn't giving up nothing. I learned that years ago. Don't cop to nothing, even if they got pictures. Deny it. Start counter accusations immediately. When I got out, I went to go find where this woman was, and the family told me to stay away from them, that I did enough damage to their family. And there was, there's a big hole in my gut for many, many years wondering about that little baby. I never got to find out if it was a boy or a girl or what happened. But I ran into this other girl, and I hooked up with her. She was a young chick, man. She had a lot of family, had a lot of money. And about this time, this company came out with this new product called Roar. And we called them Gorilla Biscuits. Anybody here ever gone to jail for just being stupid in public? My people. I didn't do anything criminal. I'd just be downright stupid right in front of God and everybody, and they'd lock my ass up, And this little gal, she bailed me out of jail 3 times in 1 week for the same stuff. The last time she bailed, I said, what the hell do you keep bailing me out of jail for? And she looked at me with big brown eyes. She said, well, what else do you want me to do? I married her. I know nothing about love, but I know a lot about jail. No. Not woman that won't go to bed until I'm out of jail. I want them on my side, and I don't want them to be able to ever testify against who this saw. I got busted again right after that. I went to jail for another 1.5 years, and I got out. I had the most ridiculous parole officer. you ever heard of. He just got out of the Marine Corps, and he vowed the day I got out that he was going to put me back in. And I got my case transferred to up to Oregon. Nice place, awfully wet. I got up there and my wife, so she said she was pregnant, and I got this parole officer up there, man. Check this out. I come up to his little office and he comes out. He's got this Volkswagen bus with flowers on it. He's got long hair, and he gets out. He says, "Hey, man, what's up?" And he shakes me, and he said, "Man, just be cool. Give me a call once in a while." And I said, "You bet, pal." And I never heard from him again. You work with someone like that. I like that. When my wife told me she was pregnant, I mean, I've been running hard for a long. I was an old man when I was 20 years old, and I wanted to settle down. I wanted to have a family. I'd always wanted more than anything in this world to have children, and to have a woman that loved me and respected me, and live in a neighborhood and the neighbors respected me. They didn't laugh at me, and I really wanted that. I didn't know how to do it, but I tried to do it. So I quit doing all the stuff I was doing, and I went to work in the woods and became a logger. And I worked in the woods. I worked with some Indians from Utah. Yeah. And crazy guy. Hard-working men. But we got up there, and I liked the life and everything. And one day my wife said, we're going to have the baby. And I went to the hospital down in North Bend, Oregon. We took her down there, and I sat in this room. And after a bit, they came out, and they brought this little boy, and they put this little boy in my arms. And I looked at this little boy, and I had my second spiritual awakening. For the very first time in my life, I felt absolutely head over heels in love with another human being. A love that I didn't even know anyone could love that much. And my heart exploded in my chest, and I promised him, I said, you're my son, and we're going to do all those things I always wanted to do with my dad. And I'm going to protect you, and you're never going to be afraid of nothing. And we're going to do stuff. And I meant it with everything I had, I did real good up there. After one day I got a letter. They said, I'm off parole. I went, wow, that was easy. And my wife wanted to go back to California, so we went back to California. And she was pregnant again. Yeah. Set music. And same deal, man. We went to another hospital. I sit out in this room, and after a while, they bring this little girl, and they put this little girl in my arm, and the same thing happened, man. I fell head over heels in love. My heart exploded in my chest, and I'm looking at it, and I suddenly realized it's a female, and that means there's going to be men involved. And so I'm thinking she's going to get married. Where are we going to have the wedding? What am I going to wear? I know. That's the way I think fast. I'll be sitting in an A&A meeting, man, and one of you pretty gals will walk in. We'll fall in love. We'll get married, have a couple of kids. You cheat on me with that old timer out there. And I hate your guts, and you haven't even got to your chair yet. Well, I can live a whole world while you're walking across the room. I had this little girl. Thank you, bro. And I came in. I was trying to go straight. I was trying to do what I was doing. It was really hard to do in Southern California because I was so plugged in there. And one day it was me and my son. We were playing frisbee in the front yard. September 6th, 1976. He was 7 years old. He was beautiful. He was my buddy. And my wife and daughter had gone to school, clothes shopping. School was getting ready to start. And a guy came over, and he brought some good smoke over, and we smoked it. And I got thirsty. And I didn't have a big problem with alcohol at this time. I was always very leery of alcohol because I did stupid shit under alcohol. I stayed with other enhancements. I didn't react the same way, and they didn't lock me up. But that day, it was really hot that day, and I wanted a cold beer more than anything. I got on my bike, and I told my son, I said, wait right here. I'll be back in just a minute. And I got on my bike, and I went up to the store, and I got a six-pack, and I'm coming back down the road, and in front of my house, the cops are there, and the fire department's there, and all the neighbors are running. And I waited through these people, and I found out my son had chased me out of the driveway and had been run over by a truck. And I got to my little boy, and his brains, I could see him, and there was ribs sticking out of his chest legs. And a part of me died. I sat in a hospital with that little boy for the next 9 months in intensive care. And every day they told me to pray that he died because there was so much brain damage. There was absolutely nothing to hope for. And I never left, and I started crying out to this God. I don't know nothing about God. My family never went to no church. I knew nothing about spirituality. I knew nothing about nothing. But I'm crying out to this God out in that parking lot, give me back my son. I'll do anything. Give me back my son. And I tell you, my son, his body survived. The little boy was gone forever. And I got back a child who couldn't hear and couldn't talk. And he never got over the age of approximately about 4 years old emotionally. And he had lots of physical problems. In the middle of all this, my brother Bill, who lived with me all my life, me and my brother backed each other's play, right or wrong, against anyone, all our lives. There's nobody in this world I trusted more than Bill. My brother came down with a disease called schizophrenia. In the hospital, the family had him committed. And he called me from that hospital after a while, and he said, Kip, get me out of here, man. I said, are you okay? He says, yeah, I'm fine. They give me these pills. Get me the hell out of here. Do whatever you got to do. And I went against the family's wishes, and I got my brother out, and he lived with me. I had a big piece of property, and he lived across the creek from me in a mobile home. And I brought him back home, and I got to make money. I got bills coming from my son. I mean, they don't come in envelopes; they come in cardboard boxes. And I got to make some money. And I called my family in Mexico, and I told them the situation. They put a package together for me. And I told my brother, I said, Bill, I got to leave. I got to go to New York. And he said, you can't go, man. I said, what do you mean I can't go? He says, you can't go. I'm coming apart. I don't know what's going on. And I said, Bill, you got to hang tight, man. You got to hang tight. And you got to take care of my daughter, Jana. I said, you got to hang tight. No matter what it is, me and you will take care of it as soon as I get back. You know the deal. I ain't got no choice. I'm committed. I got to go. And I got in this cab, and I looked at my brother, and he was holding my little girl's hand. He was crying. I've never seen my brother cry before in my life. And I got back in New York with these Yankees, and they all started jerking me around. And instead of 3 days, I ended up back there for 3 weeks before I finished it. Then I got back home, and I got out of the cab, and I looked at my daughter. She was there, and I said, where's my brother? She goes, I haven't seen him. And we went back to that mobile home, and I knew before I got there, but I opened that door, and my brother's head fell out and landed at my feet. He had blown his head off 3 days after I left. And what was laying in the doorway was just a big pile of maggots, and something inside of me completely snapped and broke. And I can tell you this from my heart to yours, I thank God that I'm an alcoholic. I thank God alcohol does for me what it does. Alcohol immediately erases all the guilt. It stops the screaming inside of my head. It allows me to get a little bit of rest at night. And if I keep enough alcohol in my body, I can live one day at a time reasonably comfortable. And that's when things started changing. I'm drinking around the clock now. The pain is so incredible. The guilt. And my wife, she loved my brother. She loved our son as much as I did. But, I ain't paying no attention to her. And some other guy was. And she left with him and left with that little girl. The state I was in, my little girl was sitting on my lap, and she was crying. She goes, what's going on, Dad? Everybody's dying. Everybody's leaving. You're acting crazy. What's going to happen to me? I said, baby, we don't need nobody, man. You don't need nobody. We just hit a bump in the road, and I'm going to catch my breath here in a minute, and I'm going to make things okay. And I got her calm down and put to bed. And then I had a new experience. I don't know. You guys were pretty young here. But a fella came over to my house, and he brought this magic elixir. And in California, we call it Mad Dog 2020. I was holding my breath after that point. I've been to conferences where everybody looked at each other and went, what? I go, uh-oh, wrong crowd. Mad Dog 2020 is an event drink. And if there's any newcomers here tonight thinking maybe you're being a little bit too hard on yourself and you want to go back on out there and try it again, I'd get some Mad Dog. And if you're an alcoholic like most of are in here, it'll run your rusty ass back in this room so fast you won't even know what happened. I drank this Mad Dog, and I was in my living room, and the next thing I know, this lady said, excuse me, sir, you've got to get off the airplane. I said, what? And I looked around. I'm on this big wide-body jet. You know, my little girl is sound asleep next to me, and the plane is empty, and this lady's looking at me very perturbed. And I said, where am I? She says, you're in Fort Lauderdale. I said, no, I hate Fort Lauderdale. And she goes, I don't know, sir, you got to get off the plane, please. So, you know, you don't want to look stupid. So I wake up my daughter, because she's 5. She knows what's going on. And I said, we're here. Hoping she's going to throw me a bone, you know. And she looked out the window. She goes, oh, goody. I went, okay, well, this... it's the next indicated thing. I said, let's go. And I found out that I had luggage, I had money. And I called a cab. Cause you don't want to scare her. You got to act like you know what you're doing. You know, and I said, I called a cab. I said, take me to a hotel and stop at a liquor store because I need to figure out what's happened here. And I came through in 4-point restraints, butt naked. For a minute, I thought I might have missed something really cool. Well, then I saw the bars on the windows and that green, institutional green. I've been in prison in 3 different countries. They paint them all the same color, you know, calming green. And, you know, I found out that it was a misunderstanding. Apparently, I had met a young couple and they were partying next to us, and they had this local Floridian additive that you could really drink with. And I was drinking tequila, and they were drinking Jack, and we drank their liquor, my liquor, went through all their additive, and we wanted more. Can you believe that? And I said, you guys ever heard of Mad Dog 2020? And they went, no. And I felt like a missionary. I come through, and they let me go talk to the psychiatrist. And he says, well, here, apparently what happened, you were down in the lobby at about 3 o'clock in the morning, butt naked, trying to introduce yourself to some young lady. And the cops came, and they couldn't catch you. You started running around, hanging on curtains, and they finally had to mace you and club you, and they took you to the jail, and the jail wouldn't take you because you were too nuts. So they brought you to county mental health, and they gave you some Thorazine, and you calmed right down. And I went, I see. I talked to them. I said, you know, this is a bad mistake. You know, I've been through a lot of trauma. I've got money. I guarantee you, I don't like Florida. I will be out of this state before the sun sets. I give you my word. And the guy said, "That's a good idea." And he let me go. And I don't know where my kid is. You can't say nothing because they could call the cops. But I got outside, and thank God that young couple had brought my daughter. They were just walking up the walkway, and she jumped into my arms, and I said, "Come on, baby, we're getting out of here. I told you this place sucks." And I can tell you, I'd like to tell you that was it, but that was the beginning of a very long, long road that I ain't gonna go into. We lived in 5 different states over the next 3 years, and every place was exactly the same thing. And the last place I was running at a dead run out of Georgia, and I met a young man in a bus on going to Oklahoma, and my daughter was talking to him, and he was a religious guy. And she said, "Daddy, listen to this." He says that we can come and stay at his place, and you can work for his family, and they can get me in school and stuff. And I've been promising her this, and the guy's looking at me, and I'm going, "Is that so?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "But sir," he says, "I have to tell you, we don't allow any alcohol on our farm." And I went, "Really?" And my little dog, Daryl, she's looking at me and begging. So I gave in. And they were right. They didn't drink out there. And when I worked out there, God, my daughter was just in heaven. Gave us a little apartment there, a little house. And they took her school clothes shopping. They bought her school. And about 2 weeks later, I'm absolutely insane. But see, alcohol is not my problem. I have an acute allergic reaction to sobriety. About a week with no liquor in me. I was talking to Ryder, the guy that stood up and had 3 days. I went, "Man, that's a long time between drinks. 3 days, that's a long time, yeah." Because I'm absolutely insane for 3 days. And it was 2 weeks, and I hadn't had a drink. And they gave us a paycheck. And this guy I worked with said, "Hey, I'm going into town to cash my check. You want to come with me? I'll buy you a beer." And I went, "Yeah." I got to tell you what happened. I got in late that night. I had blood on my clothes. It wasn't mine. I snuck in, and my little girl was sitting there waiting, and she knew what was going on. I said, "We're getting out of here." And she grabbed the pillowcase and grabbed her couple of odds and ends and stuff, and I changed clothes and washed up. And I stole that man's pickup truck. I went down to the bus station and bought a bottle of wine and got on that bus and passed out. And I come through the next morning, and we're pulling into Albuquerque. And my little dog girl, she's crying. She's rocking back and forth. I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "Daddy, you haven't fed me. I'm so hungry." I said, "As soon as we stop, I'll get you something to eat." And we pulled into Albuquerque, and thank God, every bus stop, there's always a liquor store right when you get off the bus. And my little girl, I went in the store, and I got her a sandwich, and I got me a bottle of wine. I got up to pay for it, and I only had enough money for one or the other. And I put her sandwich back. And I've done a lot of things in this world that I would never share from the podium, but I've never done anything that humiliated me more than that. When I couldn't look at her, I got back on that bus, and I just walked by her. Went back to the back of the bus, and there was this elderly black lady on that bus, and she looked at my daughter, and she says, "Honey, would you please sit with me?" She says, "My daughter made me this big lunch, and I just hate to travel alone. God bless that lady wherever she is, because she took care of my daughter all the way back to California." We got back, we did what all heroes do. I went to Mom's house. Told you about my mom. My mom has no Al-Anon tendencies whatsoever. Take no prisoners, eat the babies. That's her. I knocked on her door, and she opened that door, and she looked at me with fire in her eyes. She looked at her granddaughter, who she thought the sun rose and set on her, man. And she hadn't heard nothing from us in 3 years. And she grabbed my daughter, and she got down and hugged her, and she put her in the house. She turned around and looked at me and damn near put her finger right through my chest. Said, "You get off my property. If you ever come near me or her again, I'll kill you myself." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I left. And I don't know anything about the next 3 years. I was a wino. I lived in the bushes in California, right on the Pacific Ocean, in the bamboo patch. And a septic tank from this restaurant drained down in there. Nobody would go in there because it smelled real bad. And right on the Pacific Coast Highway. I could go across the highway and there was a 7-Eleven or a little biker bar, and I'd panhandle for wine. And if I couldn't get any wine, I'd stand at the door of that bar and wait for someone to order a drink and go to the bathroom and run in and drink as much as I could before someone beat the hell out of me, you know. And I lived that way. I lived that way for the next 3 years. I had no contact with anybody. I went to jail on that one corner 52 times for drunk in public, you know. I was in the hospital 9 different times with severe injuries due to alcohol. I was in county mental health about 11 different times. And one morning I was out there and I was sicker than a dog, man. I'm physically addicted to alcohol. And that's more than, I mean, I can't stop drinking. If I stop drinking, I go into convulsions and it's very painful. And I know I'm getting ready to go in when I'm getting these flashes. I haven't had a drink in almost 5 hours. And I'm standing there, I can't even panhandle no more. I'm just standing at that doorway. And this man pulled up and in this 4-door sedan, he's wearing a suit and tie, and he's got this square little wife sitting next to him, you know, and his square little kids sitting in the back. I looked total disgust, wondered how they could live like that, you know. The guy got out of the car and he walked up to me and he said, "Sir, will this help you?" And he gave me 2 $1 bills. I almost tore his arm off, you know. I ran in that liquor store and got me a quart of wine and a short dog, and I came back out and I put that short dog straight down. I held my face against that glass until the magic started happening. I opened my eyes and I saw that family all looking at me and talking. And I knew they were judging me, and I turned around, cursed them, and flipped them off and went back to my bush. You know, and I'm laying there in this bush, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was an auditory hallucination. I don't know if, because I had a lot of those. Or someone on the bank yelling or whatever, but I'm in my bush sucking on this bottle of wine, and all I hear is, "Maybe you ought to go to AA." And wow, where'd that come from? And I don't know how it happened, man. You know, I know y'all hear about blackouts. When you really get sincere about this stuff, you start getting whiteouts. And that's you're in a blackout for so long, every once in a while you come to. And everyone's looking at you, you know? And then it fades to black. And I come to and I'm standing at the back in a big auditorium with all these square people looking around, and a guy up at a podium, he's looking at me, and I'm looking around, and I think it must be a PTA meeting or something. I mean, you know, and the guy looked, he says, "Are you looking for AA?" And everyone turned around and looked at me. You know, my hair came way down past my ass, and my beard came down past my belly button. I weighed about 120 pounds, and a lot of things lived on me besides me. And I've been living in the same clothes for 3 years. And they told me I had a distinct odor and the craziest look they'd ever seen on a human being's face. And see, I don't have a lot of meaningful conversations with people very much anymore. And I get real nervous when I'm around people. And they asked me to identify myself, and everyone looked at me, and I just looked at her, and I went, "Ah." He goes, "Welcome, come on, have a seat." I'm sitting in this meeting, man, they're talking about God. You know, I'm like, uh-oh. I see him passing this basket. It went by me. I grabbed a few bucks, you know. And I'm listening to all this lofty talk and all this stuff, and I'm going, this is the lamest thing I've ever seen in my life. I got to get out of here. I got $2 in my pocket. I can go get a quart of wine. I'm ready to roll, man. And I got ready to leave. This guy was going on and on. I went, geez, I got to go. And I grabbed my hat. And this lady had been looking at me since I kept walking in the room. She kept looking at me, and she said, I got ready to leave, and she stood up. She goes, "Son," she goes, "please don't go." And she started walking towards me. You remember them, the Blues Brothers? Remember the nun? Yeah, that was a nun. She's just But that's what it appeared to me like, And she's talking to me and she's getting closer and closer. She goes, I walked in these rooms 27 years ago in Long Beach, California, and I didn't want to be here. The cops brought me, said they were tired of arresting me, and maybe I ought to go in there and maybe these people could help. And I got in and I looked in the back door and I saw all you nice looking people. You're all cleaned up. And, I thought it was a PTA meeting or something. She goes, and I knew when you turned around and you saw me and you saw what I was, that you wouldn't want me around your men. She goes, I've been on the streets of Los Angeles since I was 13 years old, and I've done everything a woman has to do to survive. And when I saw you, I felt dirty. But thank God a woman grabbed hold of me and brought me into that room. And that woman started sponsoring me, and that woman taught me how to be a woman. Instead of a street whore, And this lady, she was a lady, man. She's looking fine. She goes, I went to school. I got an education. I had a career, and I did all things. She had had a drink in 27 years. She came up and put her arms around me, and she whispered in my ear, she says, please, son, don't go anywhere. We need you here desperately. And she said that to me. Ain't nobody said that to me before. And all of a sudden, man, no one in this world has ever made me cry over nothing. And my guts are just tearing up, man. All of a sudden, my eyes are watering up, and pretty soon I'm sobbing and sniveling like a little schoolgirl, right in front of the PTA, So I started coming to A&A, and you all lied to me right from the beginning. You said, just don't drink and go to meetings. Well, that might be fine for a problem drinker, but I am an alcoholic, and alcohol is not my problem. You better get me a solution quick. Cause when you take, what's left when you take alcohol away from an alcoholic? Ick. Where? Ick. Who would ever want to feel like that? Everything's so real. You remember all these things, Oh my God, I don't want to think about that stuff, And you told me to get a sponsor, and I've been on parole half my life. I'm not about to ask one of these lops to sponsor me, And I looked at these, said, you got to take these steps. I looked at those steps and said, I'm powerless. I've been carrying a gun since I was 14 years old. Well, I ain't powerless. Try me, And said, talked about insanity and my life's unmanageable. I like my life unmanageable. I mean, who really wants to know what's going to happen next? What a boring way to live. Then I said, well, what's this? He goes, well, you got to go make amends. I said, make amends? He goes, yeah, you take this inventory. I inventory. He goes, yeah, you got to write down everything you've ever done and share it with another human being. I fell out of my chair laughing on that one. I'm a career criminal, and I pride myself in no paper trails of any of my activities. Now you want me to write it all down and share it with Boris here, Ain't gonna happen, Then I said, what? And then I got the amends. What does that mean? He says, you got to face every person you've ever harmed and make it right. I go, what do you mean make it right? He goes, you have to go face him and make it right. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah. Loopy, don't shoot, man. Listen. I'm sorry I shot you and your brother and your dog and took all your stuff. But I'm in a spiritual manner of living today. That just impressed the hell out of him, I'm sure, I can't do any of this stuff you want me to do, man. I might be fine for you people that cheated on your taxes or whatever. I had never been a member of their society. And I couldn't do it. And I kept coming. Thank God there was a group of men in Alcoholics Anonymous, this one meeting in Carlsbad, Thursday night workshop, and a guy named Cliff R. And Cliff is a dear friend of mine today, and Cliff saved my life, him and his sponsor and another group of men, because every week I would come to that meeting like an animal. To whatever they were doing, they would break away from their friends and they would come rushing up to me and say, oh, good to see you, Kim. They didn't tell me what I had to do. They just welcomed me into the rooms and had a seat. and they never stopped welcoming me back. And that's why I'm sober today. Those people never stopped welcoming me back. And I did that for almost 7 years. And in 7 years, AA didn't work for me. I was just absolutely out of my rabbit ass mind. And I started drinking on Christmas morning, or the day of Christmas Eve. And I got in a fight with a cop that night. I woke up in jail the next morning, butt naked. Cops had beat me down, my face was stuck to the mat. And you're trying to roll your face off that mat, it's stuck to it. And the cops are in your porthole laughing at you. You just know Santa ain't coming, And they let me out, and they said, we'll see you later, Kip. They knew me on my first name basis, and I knew I'd be back. And I made a commitment. I ain't going back to AA. AA don't work for people like me. I'm that person they talk about in chapter 5. And I can't do this thing. God bless you people that can. But the only thing in this world that works for me is alcohol. Alcohol takes away the pain. Alcohol takes away that alcoholic loneliness that only an alcoholic knows. Because we completely separate ourselves from all humanity. And I was the loneliest human being in the face of the earth. I had $90, and I don't know where it came from, but I invested every penny of it in Gallo port wine. And I went down and I started drinking. On January 6th of 1984, I hit the worst spot I've ever hit in my life. And that was the day that alcohol stopped working. See, I didn't quit liquor. Liquor quit me. It stopped working. And if you're an alcoholic, and Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work for you, the day that alcohol stops working, God help you. Because you're going to know loneliness that as few people can even imagine. You're going to come to the jumping off spot, and you're going to wish for the end. I'm going to hit that spot. It was the most terrifying. I pulled out my gun, I put it to my heart, and I pulled the trigger, and I blew my left lung and 2 ribs out, and it knocked me across the room. And I'm laying in the hospital. I'm laying there, and the blood's pumping out of my chest, and I said, thank God this nightmare's over with. Let me out of here. And I come to in this hospital. You thought I died, didn't you? Guy said, for me to drink is to die. I mean, only if you're lucky. And there was this old guy in AA. I hated his guts. He was an old gangster from Chicago, Charlie Tuck. And he said he'd been sober. When he came at AA, they only had 1 A in it, But he came up to me in a meeting one time. He always had a suit on, always had that always had a bunch of newcomers following around like penguins, He came up to me in a meeting one time. He got right dead in my face. He said, you think you're pretty tough, don't you, kid? I looked him right in the eye. I said, I'm tough enough, old man. Don't you ever try me. And he looked at me, and he got this big grin on his face. He put his nose right on mine. He looked at me right in the eye, and he said, you ain't tough. He said, you're the scariest son of a bitch in this room. That might make you dangerous, but it sure as hell don't make you tough. And he walked away laughing at me. And I did my inventory, and I got to my fears. The greatest fear that I carried my whole life, that ran my life, was I was so afraid of you other men. I was so afraid you would see how afraid I was. And I would do anything in this world to prove to you I wasn't afraid. And that ran my life. And this old man saw right through me. I was in that high. What came through in that hospital, I thought I was dead, but I heard this gravelly voice, and I opened my eyes, and there's Charlie Tuck standing at the foot of my bed. I thought I'd died and gone to hell, and this was it. So, he looks at me, and he just looked, and he put his arms around his chest. There's 2 newcomers with eyes as big as saucers, and they're looking at me. And I go, oh, God, they're going to start preaching. And all Charlie said is, fellas, come here. Take a look at this poor, pitiful thing here. Get up there close to him. Look at him. Look at all those tubes. Look at his eyes. Now come back here. He says, now, fellas, I want you to pay close attention. This is what happens to an alcoholic who refuses to take the steps. Come on, let's go. And they left. I got on that hospital in May and I made it over to Charlie's house. And I asked that old man if he would help me get sober. And he looked at me and he looked at me for a long time. And he said, Kip, he says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. People like you don't get sober. People like you die in institutions. You die on the side of the road. They don't even bother to write your name down. She says, but the good news is this. I've been around and I can see something. I see something in your eye. Because that morning, the very morning that I woke up, the first thought I'd always had, my eyes open, is I need a drink. I need something quick. But I wasn't thinking that morning. It was weird. I've been to so many of you people's meetings, you'd poisoned my mind. Because what I was thinking was ABCs. It's read at the end of every meeting I've ever been to. You said today that I'm an alcoholic. I'm powerless. I know I got paperwork in the state of California classifying me as a chronic alcoholic. At that period of my life, the state of California was in the process of making me a ward of the state for chronic alcoholism. It'd be quite evident to everybody I was a danger to myself and others. I got no denial about me being an alcoholic, but that's not the question. It's to my innermost self, not what I'm going to admit to you or tell someone else in here. What does that mean? I'm powerless over alcohol. And my God, he's so gracious, he gave me a vision that morning. He gave me a vision that morning on that bus. And the first vision I had was that day my daughter was born, and I felt that love exactly the way I felt it that morning. It was so real. And the next day I went right back to this guy, and you see this man walking past a little girl who's starving. He has a bottle of wine, and I understood for the first time what powerless means. Powerless, I will steal the fruit out of my own child's mouth to get another drink. And I got no choice in the matter. And that really scared me because, you know, the next part said that no human power. I kept hoping one of you gals was going to fix me. Some of you tried. You should have listened to your sponsor. And I told man, Charlie, and the next thing I said, you know, I got down on my knees and said that God could and would if he were sought. And I thought about the men who impressed me in AA. All of them talked about the same thing. They talked about this power that had come into their life. And I got down on my knees. I said, you know, I don't know who you are and I don't know what you are, but from this point on, I will do anything if I don't have to drink. And something magic happened inside of me. I don't know how the words to describe it, you know. But I haven't had the obsession to drink alcohol from that moment. And I got over to Charlie's house, and he laid it out for me, and he said, are you willing to do anything? I said, I'll do anything you tell me to do. He got up, it was Mother's Day, he lived right across from this park, and we walked out to this park, and all these families were there, and he dropped down on his knees. I said, what are you doing? He said, get on your knees. I said, in front of all these people? He said, listen, son. So the only hope you got is that God is going to grant you some mercy. If you're embarrassed of God already, don't waste my time or his. And besides, these people have been stepping over you for years, you know. And he started to stand up. I said, wait a minute, man. And I dropped on my knees, and he took my hand, and he did that third step prayer with me. And he took me back, and he set me in this room. And, he was one of the first tapers in California. And he had these 6-hour reel-to-reels of Norm Alpe. If you ever heard Norm Alpe, 6 hours of Norm Alpe is like 24 hours of interview. You can put more words in one sentence than you can imagine. But it's just Norm Alpe and all these other great speakers, and the men he sponsored came up, and they took care of me. From that time, he got me actively involved in service. I was in service in the hospital and correctional facilities for the next 12 years. I went to meetings every single day for the first 8 years until I said I got 90 days. He said, so what? And that's the way it was around there. He taught me what the word commitment was. And from that day forwards, I got my daughter back, the one I never met. She came into my life, and I got to make amends to that family. She brought me 4 beautiful grandchildren. I got custody of my children back, and I raised my family. I remarried. I started a big business, got real rich, lost everything. Lost it all in 93. In 1993, I lost everything. My wife decided she was a lesbian. She left with this woman, took my boat, you know. It was a nice boat, too. You know, my son got sick. He died in my arms. And my daughter, a man broke into her house and brutally raped her and cut her to pieces. And my sobriety date didn't have to change. I found out that Alcoholics Anonymous. Will work for absolutely anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. These 12 steps will give you the tools to walk through anything life has to offer. And you don't ever have to drink, and you don't ever have to run again from nothing. No. I have 7 daughters, and I had 2 sons. I have 1 son. My children go from 48 years old to 15, Still like that music, I was diagnosed with lung cancer last year, and I've spent the last year in treatment. This was one of my first times that I even been out of my house, almost a year. And they told me that I'm in remission. And then, my God is gracious to me. I've a lot. I'm respected in my community. I went to college. I got a degree. Became something I never thought I would be. Made a lot of money. I own my own house, and I live in California, and no one can say that. Huh? I have a wife that I've been married to that I've never laid a hand on or been unfaithful to in 16 years. She's my dearest, dearest friend and my partner. I want to tell you, I want to thank you for inviting me. You're so young, and it's so wonderful to know that AA is in good hands. I'm getting old. I've been around for a long time, and sometimes I wonder, but man, you guys, you wore my ass out before I even started talking.